Okay, so we're going to cover sports marketing. The second last topic that we're going to look at, and that is pricing. So within this class, we're going to look at the importance of pricing, obviously go through the basics, then we'll move into pricing policy and the marketing mix. Why do we need to know? Why do we need to understand this? Shouldn't we leave this to the accountants and so on? And we move into price expectations, pricing strategy, approaches to pricing, and then looking at competitive advantage and so on, and ethical considerations. So from a marketing point of view, there are two general issues concerning price. Number one, it's obvious, it's the unit of revenue. That's the money that's coming in. So you multiply the number of units that you're selling by the price that you're selling at, and you have your income there, the revenue that the company or the business is making. But secondly, it's an operational variable. The reason that we're learning about it in a marketing module is that it's a tool that we can use in marketing. So it's that's what an operational variable means. Some variable is something that can change, and operational is in for our uses in this case. So it's a tool within your marketing mix, your 4 Ps. And it's the second of the 4 Ps. We'll get to in a second. So it's part of our strategy. So that means price is a measure of the benefit of the purchase to the buyer and the cost of the product to the supplier, including profit. So it should be, the price should be part of what makes it a win-win for both sides. Remember, in marketing, we're thinking long-term. We want our customers to feel satisfied. We want them to be happy to pay this price, that they don't feel that we're conning them in any way. Because we don't want to con them in any way. That's not marketing, that's something else. We're looking for a long-term relationship here. We're looking for this sale, yes, but we want this sale to be the start of a long relationship where every time they want to buy that type of product, they come back to us and they keep buying from us years into the future. And for that to happen, they have to feel that they are getting value per money, so that the price, it's at a price that they are happy to pay because they're getting these benefits. It also has to be, so the win-win scenario, not only does the customer have to win, we have to win. It's not a dirty word to say we want to make profit. Profit is what keeps us in business. Profit is what keeps our employees or our colleagues in a job, keeps you in a job if you're working for the company. And that's not a bad thing at all. If there wasn't sufficient profit, then the business owner or investor would be better off just sticking the money in the bank. Why would they bother being in business if they're not going to make more than they could make from just putting it somewhere and doing nothing, just earn interest on it? So that's, as a marketer, that's your job, is to make sure that that profit level is high enough to stay in business. And that's where the win-win is. So pricing decisions are guided by two possible business objectives: profit maximization and growth in market share. So some profit maximization is clearly a more short-term goal, but obviously we do have to pay our bills this month. We have to pay the wages this month. So we have to keep our eye on the long-term ball, but also look after the short-term bills as well. So prices, as we said, the measure of the value exchanged by the buyer for the value offered by the seller. It might be expected, therefore, that the price would reflect the costs to the seller of producing or buying the product and the benefit to the buyer of consuming it. So price also has an important role as a competitive tool to differentiate a product, and to differentiate the firm as well, and thereby exploit market opportunities. Pricing must also be consistent with other elements of the marketing mix, and hence, since it contributes to the overall image of the product. So there's no point in Rolls-Royce or Bentley having a car suddenly slashing the prices on their cars and making them 50 grand instead of 5 million. That, even if they could make a profit on that, that would be detrimental to the image of the brand of being this super high end premium product. So price has an impact on what customers think about it. And you have to make sure not to devalue that image as well with the price. So as marketing people, we don't have to be accountants. I'm not expecting you guys to be accountants, but we have to understand enough to have that conversation. So we have to understand relevant accounting methods that may affect our decisions, because our actions influence the financial well-being of the whole organization. If we're doing our job right, we should know what's going on in all the departments. We should be able to talk to all the departments, and that includes the accountants. And we are part of the financial decisions, because we cannot just let the accountants set a price, because we now know that that price has an impact in the mind of the customer as to the quality or the promise that we're making in terms of value or quality that we're offering. So it's our responsibility to be aware of and contribute to the control of costs as well. We need to understand, how do we calculate costs? Roughly speaking, obviously. So when we talk about costs, it's the amount of resources, usually quantified in monetary terms, obviously, which is allocated to preparing a product to offer to a market. In other words, it's everything we spend on making an offering before we add the element of profit. So if we're a manufacturing company, it's not just what goes into making that product. It's perhaps the cost of the receptionist out front. It's the cost of the advertising. It's the cost of our marketing department. It's all those other elements that aren't directly associated with this unit that is coming off the production line. So we have to kind of understand how we can build that up and divide it perhaps among different products. If we're making a range of products in the same business or in the same factory, we need to see how can we apportion the cost of that receptionist or marketing team or whatever it is. So that's cost. Next is profit. So profit is the excess over costs in revenue. So it's if we set a particular price, part of that price is going to be the cost, and the remainder amount is profit. So from here to here is the total price that the customer is paying. So when we receive a sum of money from a sale, whatever is left after we've paid all those costs, that's the profit we have. We can put that in a quick diagram form. And so it's kind of a funny butterfly or maybe spaceship on one side. So we've got this, we'll look at the right-hand side, selling price. So from there to there, and it's the same size across the other side, but it's divided. So most of it is looking at costs, and that includes elements that go into making the product. And the machinery involved, the plant machinery and so on. It includes the administration in the company, the sales personnel, all that's involved there, distribution. So marketing would be included in there as well. And then the small bit on top is the profit. So within working out how to decide on the cost, how to calculate it. So cost accounting is a whole area of accounting that involves the calculation of costs of products and services. So obviously we're not training to be accountants here. I'm not an accountant. I'm not expecting you guys to be, but we just have to learn enough to be able to, as I said, understand the basic concepts and also to be able to have the conversations with those finance people as well. So product cost then equals the cost of a finished product built up from its cost elements, and therefore the total cost of the product or service consists of the following. So we've got the obvious stuff, the materials that go into a product if we're making something, the cost of wages of everybody involved, and the cost of other expenses that don't fall naturally into one of the other categories. We have a catch-all then, other expenses. It could be the coffee in the canteen, it could be the printers in reception, you know, that sort of thing. Maybe they're not necessarily materials in the sense of going into the product, but they're being consumed. The media advertising space and so on that we're using the services of other people. Maybe we're employing an ad agency because we have a very small marketing department and we're employing them. So direct and indirect costs. So this is one way of categorizing things. So there's a few different ways of breaking up costs. So this previous one, that's one way, looking at product costs, so materials, wages, other expenses. We can look at direct versus indirect. So direct is the expenditure that can be economically identified with a specific saleable cost unit. So it's easy to see. If we're making Coca-Cola, we can see for every 1,000 liters of Coke that's coming off the production line, there's so many thousand bags of sugar being bought or needed, kilos of sugar. So it's easily identifiable. You can divide. We know that so many grams goes into each whatever, and we can just do a simple maths calculation. So it's direct. Indirect. This is where it's kind of harder. It's expenditure on labor or materials or services which can't be economically identified with a specific saleable cost. It's not as simple. Maybe within the factory floor, there are 3 different products being made and they are all at different amounts. Maybe one product has just started to be sold, so it's only, we're only producing very small amounts at the moment. So is it fair that we divide the cost of the receptionist by 3? That would make those products very expensive if we're selling maybe 10 times the other products. The other, like product A, we're only selling a few units now, but we're hoping to sell a lot more in the future. But we're selling 100 times that of product B and maybe 10 times that of product C. So how do we divide up the receptionist costs? It's not as straightforward. It's not a simple maths calculation. There could be arguments in a boardroom deciding what way to do that. So that's indirect. If it's not that simple, it's indirect. Then we can do, so that's one way, direct or indirect. We can look at functional costs as a different way of doing it, and that would be a costing system based on the function. So the function within the company is what that's talking about. So, for example, manufacturing costs can be divided into, so again, an example of a company that makes something. So we can look at production and manufacturing costs, we can look at admin costs, and then we can look at marketing, selling, or distribution costs in their own category. We can also do it fixed cost versus variable cost. So a fixed cost is something which is incurred for a period, and which within certain output and turnover limits. So basically, usually they're unaffected by fluctuations in activity. There are exceptions, so we can renegotiate a deal after a year, or we can change plans. If you think of mobile phone plans, there's kind of standard ones if you want to go on bill pay, but if you want to get that phone free, you go up to a higher, you go to the one with unlimited data and huge amount of call time and text and so on, that sort of thing. So a fixed cost basically means the rent, the lighting, even if we've got less orders this month than last month, we're still paying the same rent on the building. We're still paying the same electricity, roughly speaking, because all the lights are still on. The machinery is usually on whether it's working or not. So it's probably, a similar usage rate there, but certainly all the lights are still on. Most of the staff are probably on full-time contracts. So even if they don't have much to do, we're still paying their wages. So all of those type of things are fixed costs. So the bit in the middle there where it's sort of qualifying it within certain output and turnover, blah, 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 whatever. I mean, if things persist where we're really not, making, the production has gone down an awful lot, we can make people redundant, we can get rid of people, we can change their contracts, but that's not something that fluctuates up and down each month. So a fixed cost is something, it's usually locked in to some degree, and it takes effort to get out of it. Whereas a variable cost is going to go up and down immediately with the level of activity. So, if we're making more Coca-Cola, we're immediately buying more sugar, and that sort of thing. Any part-time staff are immediately getting more hours when we're making more stuff, and they're getting less hours when we're making less stuff. So it's direct in that sense. Direct material costs rise as more units are manufactured. You have to buy more raw materials and components or whatever it is. Sales commission then is going to immediately go up or down as the sales go up or down. So that's variable. So the telephone, I used an example. So they're usually, if they're rising and falling with the usage rates, then they're variable. If it's in a fixed plan, then it's fixed. So that can depend on the deal, the deal that the company is locked into or not. And then the rental of the building and so on is fixed, as obvious. So why figure these things out? Why have a costing system at all? So the benefits of a costing system is, number one, that you can identify profitable and unprofitable products, service or products or service or call center. Sorry, I can't speak today. You can do the costing on the overall factory. Maybe you have different divisions in different locations, so you can cost up everything that's being made in that location and compare one location to another. So that's where centers comes in, and then profitable and unprofitable products or services for each unit that we're selling. Number two, identification. So it kind of falls out of point number one, is that then you can identify waste or inefficiency. If you can see that certain things are really unprofitable compared to the profitable, then you can see what's waste, maybe what line needs to be cut, or a particular geolocation that maybe it's just not viable location to operate a business. So a lot of manufacturing in previous decades that used to be in Ireland moved to other parts of the world because of this equation. The wages and costs are so high in Ireland that it's a lot cheaper in many other countries to produce those products. Number 3, assistance in setting prices. So obviously, if we know what the cost is, then we can make sure that we never set a price below that. So we can make sure to keep the accountants happy in that sense that we will be setting within a profitable range, and we can set a minimum level. Number 4, provision of accurate stock valuations. So in order to cost things up and to be able to weigh, we need to know what we're buying, what we're selling, and what we have in the warehouse and so on, because that's part of the cost. We need to know if we keep a load of sugar in the warehouse, is some of it going to go bad before it gets used? And we get a handle on all those kinds of things. Just the more you're watching something and counting something, the less waste there is. Generally, things tend to go missing less. Stuff going home in bags and so on. Number 5, analysis of changes in cost volume and hence profit. So again, because we're keeping a handle on all the numbers, we can then track them and see how things are changing over time and so on, and see it happening in real time. Number 6, assistance in planning, control, and decision making. So based on the previous points, if we can see where the waste is happening, if we can see which lines, which products or services are not profitable, then we can make the big decision to say, cut that one or keep that one going. Maybe let's focus on this one and try and push that one more. Or maybe we're making a decision to say, look, we need to increase the marketing budget. Maybe we're not giving that particular product a chance to be profitable. Maybe we focus on that for a while. So we need all these numbers in order to make those decisions. And then the final one, evaluation of the effectiveness of the decisions. You need to be able to look back over your previous decisions and see how is that now tracking with the numbers. And so overall, the justification of whatever costing system you put in place, it must be such that the benefit of that system outweighs the cost of actually doing it. Because there is a cost with keeping a cost system, because who is doing all these calculations, who's who's keeping track and doing the counting and the checking. Somebody is having to go around with clipperboards checking warehouse stock. It's not just a quick Excel sheet exercise sometimes. So you have to, or maybe it should be. So if you're a one-man band, in terms of a very small startup company, and literally, you're a department of one person, then you can't be expected to maintain the level of stock control and systems that, for example, Coca-Cola, to stick with the reference there, they would have whole departments and perhaps hundreds of accountants working on this across, their global operations. That's a vastly different system that they're going to be following than a very small company with less than 10 employees. So it has to be appropriate to the level of detail that will pay off to have it. Now, as always, or as mentioned before, marketing touches on many different areas in the business and many different areas of study. And so one such is economics. We've touched on psychology before and other areas. So for obviously pricing here, we're into accounting, and we're also into economics. So here's a theory. It is an economic theory. So economic theory of price 1. And that's all about market structures. So that says there are 3 market structures. Perfect competition, which is an equilibrium. So think of a seesaw balancing in the middle. It's not down and it's not up. A market clearing price prevails. Now, I'll come back to that in a second. Let's look at the second one. Monopoly. So you've probably played the game, but a monopoly, so mono refers to one. And this is where the seller's market power, so there's only one player in this market, and the phrase is they have a monopoly. So they are the only ones selling into this group of people with this product. And so it can happen out of differentiation. For example, Apple, when they invented the smartphone with the first iPhone, that was a monopoly situation. There were no other. They totally revolutionized the mobile phone market. All the other companies had the little push button phones, and this was a totally new type of product. And so it can be said or argued in that scenario that they had a monopoly situation in the smartphone market because they totally invented that market gradually over time. So Samsung was the second to come in with their rival model, and then over time other companies joined in and basically then practically got rid of the push button market. So that is a monopoly situation, and so the seller has the power. They are the only ones. If people want to buy that type of product, the only option is to buy it from that company. And that's a strong position for a company to be in, but often short-lived, unless it's because of a government situation. So previously, in previous decades, ESB or Electricity Ireland or whatever it's called these days, keeps changing. They had a monopoly situation. People who wanted to have electricity in their homes or businesses, there was only one provider, but it was semi-state, so the government, had tight control over not allowing them to charge what they liked for the electricity, which is possibly what would happen, in a normal monopoly situation. If it's a private company, they can charge what they want. And then, so the next one up from monopoly is oligopoly. Little hard to say, usually not often said out loud, so forgive the pronunciation. But basically, in this situation, oligo means few or some. And so it's a step up from monopoly. For the customer, it means there is some choice, but there's not a lot of choice. So there's like, think of the banking industry in Ireland. There are not that many banks to choose from compared to if you go to America or you go on the continent. There's a lot more for consumers to choose from there, a lot more competition happening between those banks. And that's why whenever you hear the banking system in Ireland being compared to other areas, they always refer to the fact that the interest rates are much higher in Ireland, and that's because they're not competing much with each other. They're usually competing on non-price elements to make it sound like they're different, or else they compete on different. So one bank will say they have the best 3-year fixed rate, and another bank might say they have the best 5-year fixed rate. Usually with mortgages, that's where the big money is for banks. So they're competing on different things. They're not trying to outcompete each other on the same product. So there isn't a lot of choice. You'll come to realize, hopefully most of you at some point will be in a position to get a mortgage at some point in your lives, hopefully, and you'll start to see, well, there's not a lot difference in it. So that's oligopoly. So basically, perfect competition, then, to come back to the third option, is when there is more competition than oligopoly, so more than some. And in that case, you have a lot of competition, and they're actively competing with each other, but they still have to remain profitable. So there is a settling of, this is where the equilibrium happens. Basically, companies, not only do customers have to accept whatever the market clearing price is, the companies kind of have to go along with it as well, in order to make their sales. So they kind of, the prices tend to settle at a certain point. They are competing. It's kind of happening from time to time. So different companies will have sales or deals or whatever, but they will be, think of supermarkets in Ireland, they have a very tight margin. So that means they are, you may hear about them being very profitable, but they have actually very small percentage profit margins overall their activity. So Lidl and Aldi have usually around 4% profit on the turnover that they're taking in. And some of the others are not as transparent, but we're talking about similar figures in those single digits, sometimes even lower than that. Okay, so that's economic theory of price one. It's literally just describing those three elements. So and just in other text form for some people who learn and like to see things in different ways or hear it described and then see it written down. So it's a classic economic theory. So the simplest is perfect competition. So neither producer nor user has any market power, and both must accept the price that is set by market forces of supply and demand, and that's that equilibrium price. Markets where there is a monopoly, suppliers have the market power because they're able to exert extensive influence over the price. Frequently arises from product differentiation. So we've talked about Apple as that example. And then a common one is oligopoly, where there are very few suppliers. So the banking system, as we talked about, very little price competition, and so prices tend to be very stable. Competition in such market conditions is likely to be restricted to the non-price elements of a marketing mix. So sometimes they'll, they might offer different kinds of warranties or other elements that come along with the main product. Now, so we've looked at the economic theory of price one, and now we've economic theory of price two. Don't worry, there isn't a big long list. We just have two. So this one is a little more complicated, but hopefully straightforward enough as well. So it's price elasticity of demand is what it's all about. And if you think of an elastic band, if I get my hair tie and I pull it, it immediately, once I let it go, it immediately snaps back. It's that immediate snap is what we're referring to when we talk about the markets being elastic in this case, or price elasticity. So if we raise, sorry, there's a calculation here. So this is an equation, and we can work out if we change the sales price. So if it's a product that's already on the market, whatever the price that is, if we change that price, so we reduce it by 10%. So we have 10% minus 10% under the line, and then over the line, we've got change in sales demand. So we can calculate how does that affect. If we reduce the price by 10%, are we going to make more sales? And how many more sales? Is it going to be 10% increase in sales? Is it going to be 40% increase in sales, or not that much? So, and whatever that result is, that number is maybe if it's going to be more than one or less than one, that's what we're after. And you can do these calculations in Excel, and usually a company will be able to track these. It's not something you would be doing on a regular basis, but once you get to know for your product, typically is it elastic demand or inelastic demand? So will there be an immediate reaction? So if we raise the price, will sales drop immediately? So people, maybe are happy enough with the price as it is, but will demand drop if we raise it even just a little bit? If we lower it just a little bit, will demand shoot up? Or will it just not move that much? So with an Apple iPhone, it can be said to be inelastic. If they drop the price, the people who love Apple iPhones are already buying them on a regular basis. It's questionable whether a huge amount more if they lower the price by 10%. For a lot of people, lowering the price of an iPhone by 10% is still an expensive phone. And perhaps not that many more people will buy it. So maybe the sales might increase by 3 or 4% or 5%, but it's not going to be that immediate rush to buy the phone with a small drop in price. So that would be inelastic, and that number would, when we do that calculation, would be less than 1. If it was something else and we dropped the price by 10%, the sales shot up by 50%. So it's a much bigger increase in sales, but it's then a decrease in sales. So if we rise the price, so this scenario is saying about raising the price. If we raise the price by 10%, if it was elastic demand, raising the price will drop demand. It's an immediate snap. That means total revenue is going to drop. Whoops, total revenue will drop. The result of this equation, we don't need to put in, I'm not going to ask you to calculate in an exam. You just need to know what that equation is. So elastic means it's less than 1 is that result. So that means we're going to have a much bigger drop in sales than the small extra we're going to get in raising the price. So it's not a good idea to raise price if we know for our product there's elastic demand. That's what we're getting at here. If we raise the price of iPhones, that we're suggesting we know from previous versions of the iPhone, we know from previous data, if a product or versions of a product have been around for a while, we've seen these calculations in action. Maybe we haven't experimented with, okay, let's just raise the price to see what happens. But naturally, companies at different times are raising or lowering the price and just tracking and just keep an Excel sheet to see what's happening each month with the sales or the sales figures going up or down, and then this question can be answered. So so if we're saying we know from previous examples of iPhones and so on that the demand is inelastic, there are people who love Apple products and they will continue buying them. So if the price is raised that little bit, the 5 or 10%, most of those are still going to buy it. And so therefore the total revenue is going to go up because we're not losing that many customers, but for each sale that we now make, we're making a lot more profit. So that's revenue. We're getting more money coming in. We may have lost a few customers, but not that many. It's not a snap. We've raised the price a little bit, but the demand has not snapped. The demand has just stayed roughly around where it was. A little bit less, maybe. Elastic then is the one it's not a good idea to raise the price if your product has elastic demand. If you raise the price that little bit, demand is going to drop. Think of in previous times when we were talking about, the sales of cheese in supermarkets, 80% of across the year, 80% of all cheese sales in supermarkets is on the particular product that is on sale in that week. It's stuff. So people are not loyal, they're not brand loyal, and there is elastic demand. If the price changes a little bit, loads of people will buy that particular one. They won't buy it at all next week if the price goes back to normal, whatever. So that's elastic. So in any market, price elasticity is important. It measures the responsiveness of demand to changes in price and is calculated as, sorry, that should be an equal sign. That line changed. Sorry, that is, so we can have it, the change in sales demand divided by the percentage change in sales price. So we've got demand over price, okay? And it's the change we're looking at, percentage change in demand over percentage change in price. So when elasticity is greater than 1, so the result of this equation is like 1.4 or whatever, it's always going to be like the kind of small numbers because it's percentages we're looking at. So when elasticity is greater than 1, so let's say if we drop the sales price by 10% and we get an increase in sales demand of 50%, really elastic reaction to that cheese offer maybe. So the result there is going to be 5. That's greater than 1. So that's an elastic reaction. It's elastic demand. So a change in price will lead to a change in total revenue. So again, just looking at the cheese example, if the price is lowered, total sales revenue will rise. So if we drop the price, a huge number will buy it compared to normal. And even though we're making less profit per unit, as long as the price is above costs, obviously, and we should never be selling anything below cost, total revenue and profit will raise. So revenue is the total amount of income coming in, no matter what the cost is. If the price is raised then, so the following week we bring the cheese back to normal or even more than normal, sales drop even lower. So a huge drop. It's that elastic reaction, the snapback, and total revenue will fall. We're getting so little sales that increase in price doesn't offset the loss of actual units being sold. And so then if the equation gives us a number less than 1, so we're getting 0.5 or whatever in that equation, inelastic. So in the Apple example I mentioned, if we drop the price by 10%, it might only change demand by 5%. So if the price is lowered, so we drop by 10%, total sales revenue will fall because there might be a tiny uptick in sales, but it's not enough to offset the drop per unit that we're experiencing. And so the overall money coming into the company is going to drop. Whereas with Apple, if they raise the price just a little bit, now we're talking within what might be considered a normal range, total sales revenue will rise because we're not going to alienate people that much. We're not going to lose too many customers, if any. And therefore we're getting similar numbers of sales and we're getting more per unit. So obviously we're taking in more money in that case. So when we're setting prices of our products and when we're deciding whether or not to do sales promotions, we should know, is our product, does it have elasticity or is it inelastic? Because there is no point in doing that sales promotion if it's not going to have an effect. We'll be getting less money, so our revenue will fall. If we know our product is inelastic for demand, there's no point in doing that sales promotion by, doing a drop, 30% cheaper rate. We should do other kinds of offers. So that's why we need to know what these are. And on the elastic side as well, maybe we could say that if the price was lowered, revenue will rise, but then if the price goes back to normal, will we lose all those customers? So will they just buy from us when the sale price is on? That's something to consider as well. We don't want them getting used to a lower price and therefore they won't ever accept the full price. So the critical nature of price is in the consideration of marketing operation is shown by the fact that it's normally the second component of the marketing mix. Product is always number one and price is always listed number two. So the other ones can be in different orders, and well, not quite, but of the 4 Ps, we've got product, price, place and promotion, sometimes inverted, promotion, place. That's fine, but it's always product, price to start with. And then physical, people, physical evidence, and process, making up the final 3. Again, those, the order, not as important as having those first 2. The most important thing in marketing is having a product you believe in and having a product that you know will satisfy the needs and wants of a certain target market. Otherwise, we're not in marketing, we're conning, or I don't know what we're doing. So price is the unit of revenue combining cost and profit at which a satisfactory exchange takes place in that transaction. So when multiplied by volume, that gives you the sales turnover, your revenue. So pricing policy is 1 or 2 basic organizational rules to guide price setting. So you might have to refer to somebody to see, are there rules you have to follow before you set that price for this new product? There may be a maximum price that the company has already done research and they will say never go above this price for this type of product or whatever it is. So they know no one will buy above that price. And they might also have a minimum price and they say that's below which we will not sell. So if they're not the same, hopefully there is some kind of gap between the minimum and the maximum, and that's where we can have the flexibility to make some marketing decisions within there. So here's what we mean by that. So here's a little diagram, and it's overall is kind of a monetary. It's like a bar in a bar chart. So the bottom part of it is this is the lowest price, minimum price, that dotted line. And hopefully that will be perhaps made up of costs plus a certain profit, a certain percentage profit. That might be, the company might say our minimum margin is 4%. It's not worth it to be in business if we're not making at least whatever X percent. And then they have done research, or maybe you in your department have done research to say what is the maximum price. So for that type of product, what's the maximum customers in your target market would be willing to pay, broadly speaking, a sort of average customer. And if there is a difference between these 2 dotted lines, that's where all these other considerations come into it. So covering the cost of developing a product suitable for the market and probably putting aside money for developing the next one. So mobile phone companies are always, because there's such huge development costs into the billions, they need to make sure that they are covered in not only previous but that they have money set aside to develop the next product as well. Considering the prices and characteristics of competitive offerings. So obviously we should be scanning to see what's happening around us, considering the needs and wants of the target market and the perceptions of the product. If we set our price too low, what will they think of it? What will they think of us if we're saying we're a premium product and yet we're the cheapest one on the market? It's not really, they don't match up. And then the final consideration is making an appropriate profit considering the opportunity cost and investment. So we could do something else with that money, and we need to make sure that, that it's worthwhile being in business and continuing to do what we do. So if we're using price as part of our marketing strategy, so it's a strategic tool, but, where do we go with that? So it's an important tool for the marketing manager to manipulate within the marketing mix, within your 4 Ps, they're your tools in your toolbox, in order to make an offering. So we could start with a question to get a handle on what we're we talking about here. So if somebody was to ask you, how much are fish and chips? If I ask the whole class, I might get a whole range of different answers, because some of you might be imagining, well, I'll buy Donegal Catch or the Aldi equivalent in Aldi, and I'll buy a bag of frozen chips and cook them at home, and I'll that's going to be a lot cheaper than somebody who's thinking, well, I got fish and chips in the local chipper at the weekend and it was whatever X price. And then if you were to, in a fancy restaurant, it's going to be, sea bass with, twice cooked chips or whatever, and all the trimmings and ambience that a restaurant gives you and so on, and that's going to be an entirely different price than the chipper price and even the supermarket price. So what we pay for is not just the product. It might be the same type of fish in each case, and the spuds, it could be still the same type of spud making the chips, but it's an entirely different thing that the customer is paying for. It's a package of attributes, which can include the brand, the occasion, and the outlet. So you can imagine the decor is totally different, and the experience and the feeling and whatever, the satisfaction of just being there is entirely different. And they all, for each one, combine in a different way, and it delivers a different set of satisfactions. So as consumers of many products, we become quite expert in the price of goods. So we have in our mind a notional range of prices, which enable us to categorize an offer as relatively expensive or inexpensive. For certain things that you're buying all the time, there's a certain range that in your mind, without thinking about it a lot, your mind will you do a double take at the till? So perhaps you have a notional range of prices for a can of Coke, and you go to various different, what price is going to make you go, sorry, how much was that? Or you see the change in your hand, perhaps the next time you go to the canteen. So that's just what that normal, roughly speaking, you mightn't be able to tell me how much a can of Coke is, but when you go and buy one, will it make you do a double take, or will you go, yeah, whatever? So the double take is when it's beyond that notional range. So that's when we're talking about the price expectation model, we can take that a little bit further. So it's looking at how do we set our prices, knowing our customers' notional range. So we look at the price of certain things, a certain product category can go from high price to low price. And so we can just put an X along that spectrum. Maybe we we set certain numbers. What is the highest price within that category of a can of soft drink, and the lowest price of can of soft drink, sold as an individual unit, in various supermarkets and so on. And so we have various ones going along that spectrum. So consider a market in which the product range in a market is represented at two ends of the spectrum by A and product Z. And the positioning of a new product entering the market at a price anywhere in between tells potential customers something about the intentions of the supplier, in terms of the benefits of the product or service with respect to what's already there on that range A to Z. And in the absence of further information, the customer can then form an opinion. So if we come into this market, the soft drink market, and our price is somewhere up here, the customer is already forming a certain idea of what maybe we're offering in the can. Maybe they're going to expect it to be, have added vitamins and sugar-free or organic, blah, 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 or whatever. And maybe if it's on the lower end, maybe they're expecting it, they're expecting something different. But what if we go beyond it? So what's already on the market is represented by these two arrows. What if we set something that's outside the range, or maybe above the highest price that's already there? We're off the scale now. What happens? So here's our range that we have, the price expectation range. So that's that notional price in the minds of the customer, that sort of rough range that they consider is relatively normal for that type of thing. So now we've put that on a graph. So we've got the price on the bottom axis, and on the y-axis now, we're going to put demand for information. So if it's a product within what we consider a normal price, the demand for information is the same. It's a straight line, and that line will come out on the X, at the same place, obviously, because it's a straight line, roughly speaking. There's no additional information. There's a certain amount of information they all will need to say, what is it? Is it orange? Is it Coke? Certain amount of information required by all prices within that range, or all products at the prices within that range. But if we go below that price, the demand for information shoots up. Why? How can it be that cheap? What's in it? Like, is this pure water? Is this like just fished from a river? So there's explanation required as to how can it be that cheap? You have some explaining to do to say, well, actually, we save money by doing X, Y, and Z. That's the information that's required. If it's at the upper end and beyond the upper end of what we expect, again, the demand for information shoots up. What are we getting for the money? Why would I buy this price that's double the next can? What am I getting for it? They want to know what's in it for me. Why would I spend that money? So and that you get that boat shape, because whether it's too low or too high, you need to explain yourself. And that's what the price expectation curve is all about. That's plain and simple. It's just shoots up both sides. Whoops. So for those of you who like to read the text, so as price moves away from the average price, so the middle is the average there, and beyond the range of expectation, which has been established by experience. So it's each individual, it's your experience, each customer's experience. Then there's a rapidly growing demand for further information. It follows that the more information which is given relevant to the potential customer's needs, then the more likely that the higher price may be expected, given the information is supported by product performance. This concept leads us to examine the relationship between information and price in strategic terms. So Aldi and Lidl both entered the Irish market roughly around the same time, a couple of decades ago. And shoppers, it was difficult for them to get shoppers because people were used to going to their Tesco and their Super Value and Dunn's, and these two shops were hugely cheaper than those other their normal supermarkets. And they thought, well, it must be sawdust, it must be crap that they have in there. And so they had a task to say, and that's part of the design of Aldi and Lidl shops. They have their own unique kind of look. They look like a discount shop. There's no fancy porcelain tiles on the floor. It's whatever cheap industrial covering, maybe painted concrete, I can't remember, or hard wearing tiles or whatever. Um, they don't stack boxes, they don't empty boxes, they just put the whole box. You don't see people, loads of staff packing shelves like you might in the other supermarkets, because they don't pack shelves. They put the whole box up there. When there's an empty box, they take it down and put a full one up there. In some cases, they just put the whole pallet. The sugar is on its own pallet. The flour is on a pallet. Some of the offers in the middle aisles are on pallets. They just don't unload. They wheel it in and just leave it there. And when that's empty, they'll take that away and replace it with another big one. And that's part of a communication strategy. It's not just effective and time efficient. They're communicate. This is marketing communications. They're communicating to the customer that they are not wasting money on staff wages packing shelves, and they are passing that on to you, the consumer. And that's how it's not that we're selling crap, it's that we're saving money. Look at the design of this shop. There's nothing fancy here. You can see all there's no fancy ceiling. You can see all the ducts and all the whatever basic fluorescent lighting and cheap fixtures, um and that's all communicating savings. And that's how we are able to sell over here at this cheaper price point for a lot of the products that are also for sale in Dunn's, Tesco, wherever. Okay, moving on. Price and promotion. So in marketing, we love these box diagrams, and essentially they're just graphs and they're just kind of closed in. So we've got price on one axis going from low to high, and it's a graph, so it's a y-axis. And on the x-axis, even though it's just labeled on top instead of bottom, we've got the amount of information going from high to low. So how much marcoms we're doing. So whether it's PR or advertising or in-store promotions. Are we doing a lot of marketing activity or not a lot? So if it's low price, but a lot of marketing activity, so high information, that's called rapid penetration. So to penetrate a market is to try and get as many, to increase your market share. So it's trying to get in there and take customers away from the competitors and gain customers by increasing market share. So that's a lot of activity with low prices. Again, Aldi and Lidl, that's their strategy. They have little booklets that go in the local papers, or you can pick them up in store. They have TV advertising. They're on social media. They're doing a lot of marketing, and they're selling at low prices. So when they entered the market and continue to do so, even now, is that they do a lot of marketing and keep low prices. Excuse me. Now, on the other hand, there are companies who keep low prices but don't do a lot of marketing. They're relying on word of mouth and habit and retaining customers and so on. Excuse me. So think of Pennies and places like that. Really low prices. They rely on people coming back and time and again and telling each other. uh, you've never seen a TV advert for Pennies, even though, they're a big enough company that they could afford it. I can't think of any social media campaigns or YouTube especially, things like that. So they do very little marketing, but they keep their prices low. So that's slow penetration, and they just try and grow customer base by word of mouth, as I said, and any customers that they get, they keep for a while and they keep coming back. Now, for companies that go into the high price range, now obviously some companies might operate in the middle, and so then you can kind of argue they're between some of these boxes, but in the extremes, if we set high prices, we're talking about skimming. So this is trying to get the cream of the milk. If you think of what skim milk is, it's the process in the factory, in the creamery, is it's this metal arm. The milk is in this big, massive vat. It's allowed to settle. Cream rises to the top, and this metal arm skims the cream off, literally in a sweeping motion. That's called skimming. In price and economics terms, skimming is trying to get the cream is the best. So trying to maximize profit per unit by getting all that cream in that sense. So rapid skimming is when doing a lot of marketing activity and having high prices, and slow skimming is very little marketing activity, but still the high prices, relying on word of mouth and retaining customers to stay in profit. So mobile phone companies definitely are in the rapid skimming. They have so many costs in terms of development. They've already spent 2 billion before the first phone can be sold. So they need to hit the market on launch day and be selling immediately. So they have, in the lead up before their launch, everybody knows when it's coming, when it's on sale, and have people queuing. If it's a good phone or expected to be a good one, they'll have people queuing up or signing up for pre-orders, and um, and they'd be willing to pay the high price. The phones always start with a really high price for the first, usually roughly 3 months. And that's their introductory phase, their launch. And in that time, they are hoping to hit break-even point. So we'll come back to that later. But they're trying to pay off the costs in that period of time. And then once they hit a certain point, then they'll start offering it on deals with the mobile phone companies, with the operator companies, and so on. So one reason the price is so significant is that it's inarguable. A product either has a lower or higher price than its competitor. It's not a matter of opinion. So it's a number. You can't argue this number is either lower or higher than that number. One of the most dreaded possibilities in industry or market is a price war. So in that case, it's one company has set a particular price for a product. The next company wants to win their customers over, so they set a lower price. And then the first company answers that with an even lower price, and it's down, 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 down. So in order to keep driving prices down, obviously their margin is getting smaller, so the profit per unit is getting smaller, but also to keep going down, quality is being cut. So they are maybe searching for inferior components or raw materials. Maybe they're, going to drop the ethics, and maybe they're not so concerned with child labor in those countries, or the eco credentials of a product or whatever it is, but they're cutting quality in various ways in order to keep cutting the costs and keep bringing the price down for the consumer. The ranges are rationalized in these companies, so that means they are offering, when you rationalize a range, it means you reduce the number of options for the customer. So maybe you had 5 different sizes, or maybe different colors or flavors or whatever, and now there's only 3 of each or whatever it is. So it makes it easier to for the company to get back the economy of scale and so on. So the customer now is faced with less options in all the companies and also less quality. And so therefore it's a war that nobody wins. The customer is now losing because they're getting crappier products, crappier choices, and there's lower profit margin for the companies involved. Now, moving on. How do we decide? How do we fix a price? We've got a new product, it's not been on the market before. How do we decide what price to charge? We've got different types of approaches to pricing, so different ways of calculating or deciding that price. We've got cost plus, target pricing, perceived value, and then we've got competitor related. So that can come in the form of either leaders or followers and so on, or average. So cost plus, in a nutshell, is the simplest method of pricing in which the standard or traditional percentage is added to the cost. So some businesses, if they don't want to, they're not able to calculate all the indirect costs or whatever, so they just take the direct costs and add 20%, and they hope that that 20% will cover the other costs that they're not really in a position to be able to accurately define, and they might end up with an overall profit of 5% or something. So like in the restaurants often they set this as a 50 or 100%, and sometimes the general public think, oh well, that's they're doubling their money, but actually that other costs have to come out of that. They're being very crude in how they come up with that pricing, but it's something that works for them, and they know, roughly speaking, it'll come out with some level of profit. Target pricing then is looking at it from the other point of view. It's where they're looking to earn an overall profit of maybe that 5% or whatever it is, or investment over a period of time. It can be done in different ways, and sometimes the break-even analysis is used, that we'll come to again in a little while. Perceived value then is taking the fish and chips approach that we looked at earlier. So it's looking at what benefit the customer is getting, so that components of the marketing mix will help to build the perception of value in the mind of the purchaser. So the high-class restaurant trying to work out what the market will stand. So how much can they charge for fish and chips in that case? So competitor related, many companies bring a product into the market in consideration of the prices that are already out there. So they scan to see what is everybody else charging, and then we'll decide. Do we want to actually fit in between what everybody else? Do we want to be a price follower? So we'll just follow what everybody else is charging, maybe charge just a little bit less, maybe charge the average. Or do we want to be a price leader? So Apple is a price leader. When they have a new version of an iPhone, they are just scanning the market to make sure they are not the cheapest on the market, and not even average. They want to be the most expensive on the market. They want that premium idea, and they establish the going rate. Everybody else then looks to Apple, setting their own prices below Apple's price. So we're going to look at these elements in more detail now. Break-even analysis, cost-based approaches to pricing, demand-based approaches, and then we look at other elements as well. So break-even analysis is a technique for investigating the interrelationship between costs, volume, and therefore profit. It's used to determine the effects on profit of changes in levels of production or changes in volume at a given costs in unit price. So we're always, the mobile phone companies are great examples in this, and we'll use them. So it's also sometimes known as cost volume profit because they're the elements that looks at. Marketers use break-even analysis widely in price setting and especially for new product pricing. Remember, most stuff that you're going to be working on is products or services that are already there. You're just trying to maybe come up with the new price to update it. Maybe you review it once a year or something like that. But new product pricing is all the more complicated because you don't have an old one to base it off. So it's a technique which can quickly provide useful impressions and aid decision making. So the break-even point, and this hopefully is terminology you've heard before and so on, and maybe kind of seems logical as well. So the break-even point is the volume level, so how many we're selling, at which revenue from sales exactly covers the total fixed and variable costs at a specific price. So all the costs for that product. So no profit, no loss. That means with mobile phone companies, before we've even sold one phone, we've probably spent $2 billion. It's usually measured in dollars. So the break-even point is how many phones we have to sell before we've not only paid back the money that it costs to make those phones, but that 2 billion as well, because that's a a negative number in our bank account. So when our bank account comes to zero, how many units does that take? And so there is obviously a maths calculation in there. Sorry, the equations get lost sometimes when these versions change. Okay, so so the formula is fixed costs divided by and then we work this out first. So price minus the variable costs. Because variable costs, we only start paying those when we start making or selling the units. So if we've only made 1,000 phones, then we're only paying for the components and raw materials that go into 1,000 phones for variable costs. But no matter what we sell, we're locked into fixed costs for a year, let's say. So the rent on the building, we can't get out of the lease, in less than a year. We can't get a subletter to come in perhaps in less than a year. So all those money, the R&D that we've done, that's already spent. So that falls into fixed costs. So that 2 billion is sitting up there, and it's going to take an awful lot for that to come down to one. So the break-even analysis then, so based on analysis, or we're searching, we're doing research, investigations into fixed and variable costs. So we have to understand what makes those up, and so we can change the equation a little bit to simplify it. So we do a first calculation in advance, and we look for the contribution per unit. So we get the sales price minus the variable costs. Okay, so let's say the sales price is 1,000 and the variable costs are, I don't know, 100. Then that contribution would be 900. So we can now simplify our equation then to have 2 billion over 900. in that case. I don't know what that is off the top of my head. Let's see. Calculator. Where's the calculator gone? Too many screens here. Okay, so we have 2 billion, 2 0 0 0 0 0 0 0. Yeah, divided by 900 equals 2 million, all the twos. So we have to, over 2 million we have to sell in that case. So that's the break-even point. 2,200,000, 200, so 2,222,000, 222.222 is what we have to sell in that case. So that's the sort of thing we're looking for. So it's a number. It's that one number, but we can also look at it as a graph. And we can play with this. So we haven't sold any phones yet when we're playing around with this. Maybe we're not sure how much to charge for the phone. So we're thinking, well, we know what if the variable costs are 100. Now, obviously, I'm being really crude with the numbers, but this is a calculation that allows us to make decisions. So it means that we can play around with it. Maybe if we change the price, what if we change the price to 1,100, then we're getting the contribution then becomes 1,000 instead of 900, and that means a lot less phones that we have to sell to hit that break-even point. So at break-even, total costs equals total revenue, and therefore the contribution equals, at that point, the total contribution equals the fixed costs. So our break-even sales volume, so with our previous calculation of phones, the break-even sales volume, the 2 million, 2 is the same as whatever that total fixed cost is divided by contribution per unit. So the 900 in that case, and 2 billion or whatever I said it was. We've gotten already. Okay, so the break even can also be determined graphically. So I'm going to draw a graph. It is a potential exam question. I can't remember if it's actually on the exam now, where kids use the markers all the time. Okay. Now we're going to need a few colors. Sorry about that. Okay. Right. It sounds more complicated than it is. Just I'll draw it as we go through it. But let me just read it first. I'm going to draw it up there. I've got another slide with the picture, so between all, it'll become clear, and feel free to pause and go back over it as necessary. So yeah, let me just show it first. Okay, so here we've got an example. We've got the vertical axis, the y-axis, has money, okay? And the horizontal axis, sorry, down here, is the number of units that we need to sell, or that we are selling, because we can track this as well. So we're planning in advance, but we can also track as well. So in this case, the vertical axis represents money, which is either the costs or revenue. So it doesn't matter whether it's plus or minus. We're just putting it all on the plus, okay? So if it's 2 billion in R&D, 2 billion goes up here above the line. And if it's 2 billion in revenue, it still goes up there. So we want to see where they might cross each other. So that's the money goes on the vertical, and the horizontal represents the level of activity. So this is the sales in units. So then fixed costs in this example, so this gives us something to look at. So fixed costs represented at 40,000. So fixed cost is going to be drawn as a straight line. And then the variable, where is it? Variable costs starts at the fixed and is drawn upwards as production starts or sales start. So sales obviously start at 0. Before we sold anything, we've sold 0, nothing. Okay, so we're going to read the text, and I'm going to draw my own version of that, and then we'll look at the graph again, and then we'll read a bit more, and hopefully it will all become clear. So we've got the axis. So on the horizontal axis, we've got sales or output. So orders, essentially, or, that's why it's not always. We've got the origin. So if you've ever had column for maths classes, the origin is 0 in both cases. So 0 point there. No sales at this point. No money. We haven't taken any money in, and we have no sales made yet. So we start with a sales line. So the sales line, what color will I do? Blue. Okay. We are, as soon as we launch the product, we start selling. Let's just draw it up like that. And now, once we've launched, we're producing and selling. As we produce, we take in money. So, sorry, I should have labeled this. So this is money going up. That's an arrow, and that's an arrow. Now, kids have run off with red. Right, okay, I haven't got it. So green, let's pretend this is red. Red is usually used for money going out. In the red, companies talk about, that's a negative. They've more costs than money coming in. So a fixed cost line, as we said, once we launch, we're committed. No matter how many we sell, no matter how much money we come in, the fixed costs, we're already committed to spending that 2 billion in R&D. It's already spent. So it starts up here and stays the same no matter what we do. No matter what our activity is, it's a straight line because we're already locked into paying it, or we have already paid it out. So that's a straight line. But then our variable costs only start when we start making. So once we start producing stuff and selling, then we have additional costs as we make more, as we sell more. We've more commission to the salespeople, and we've more components to pay for, and part-time sales staff to give more hours to, and all that sort of thing. But we add that on top of, because we've spent the fixed costs already. Once we start selling stuff, we have extra costs that we add on top of the fixed costs. So we can get a visual on how much altogether we're spending. So hopefully it should be at the sales line should be at a sharper angle than the extra cost. For every sales we make, we should have less costs. So this line, we'll add it on to the fixed line, and that goes off. It's at a less steep slope. than the sales. So that goes that way. Let's start labeling these properly. So this is sales, and this is expected or sometimes calculated in the past. And this is fixed, and this is total cost. Total cost. So this difference here is our variable. So you can see it gets bigger. It gets bigger the more we sell. Yeah, that makes sense. If we're selling 1,000,000 phones compared to 1,000 phones, we should have bigger costs. But our sales is going up at an even greater angle. And at some point, that bigger angle means it's going to cross our total costs. So I know it's probably getting hard to see. Let's bring the laptop a bit closer. Remove that. Oops. I'll move that to now. Oh, now things are all right. I don't have much leeway. Okay. Oh, let me make that bigger. Sorry, should have stopped sharing. Okay, sorry. Forgot it was on the small screen there. So we've got our vertical axis measuring money. We've got our output and sales. So as we make and sell more, it goes that way. So our sales line shoots up at the high angle. The blue line is sales. This could be projected sales, we know from experience and so on, or we could be tracking past products and the result of past products. So the blue is the sales, the green is the cost. So fixed costs stays the same no matter what we're doing in terms of sales. We've already committed to it on day one. So it's at this level on day one and stays at that level. The variable only goes up as we actually make sales. But because this is at a sharper angle, at some point it's going to cross over the combined green lines. So this line is the total costs that we incur no matter for everything we do. And here we see they cross over right there. That is the break-even point. And then we can see what number that is on the graph, but usually it's an equation. We can just throw it in. Excel calculates it. We don't have to work these things out. And you can track that across. Now, really, this is an explanation in the boardroom because it's a nice visual. Marketers are not going to be doing this, the graph, because the equation gives you everything you need to know. Once you understand the visual, you don't really need to be making the graph on a regular basis. It's just when you want to discuss it in the boardroom and use that information to make decisions. So that's the break-even point. Break-even point. And this is the number of sales, number of units we need to sell to hit break even. And that's the number of revenue we need to bring in to hit break even. And that's what that tells us. And as I said, mobile phone companies usually try and hit that point and they work it out. And then if that's not the number that they want, they tweak it, they go back at the start and they say, okay, well, let's try if we charge 1,200 for the phone or 1,700 for the phone. What's this? What changes is it going? And so they keep tweaking and going back and forth. And that's how you end up with funny odd numbers as well. They're really calculating and mainly they're calculating it how many can they sell in that first 3 months, but they want to hit that point in 3 months. Usually it's that's the target, that launch phase, that introductory phase. Beyond that, then because if the phone doesn't doesn't land well with the customers, those customers won't recommend it to the next group of customers, and then there may not be any profit to come after that, or very little. So they want to make sure they cover their costs in that period of time where they're just relying on those loyal customers that'll buy it without knowing what the reviews are and so on, because they are the ones that will write the reviews. Okay, so let's go back to the screen. I know this is a long one, but there are definitely exam questions on it, so hopefully that makes it a little bit more worthwhile. At least one exam question on this topic. One, most A or B questions. So that's the diagram we were working towards. So why do we do them? Break-even charts may be helpful to management in planning and production and marketing and so on of individual products or the entire product range of their company. So they can play around, put different things in there. So the chart gives the visual of how much output needs to be sold to make a profit and what the likelihood would be of making a loss if the actual sales fell short. So they could play around with, let me just stop there. So they could play around with this, keep the numbers the same. So if maybe roughly speaking, we want to charge 1,500 for the phone, and this is the calculation for charging 1,500. But what happens if this angle is wrong? What happens if sales actually, it's going to be there, and where will it cross the line and so on? That's sometimes a concern. If the sales projections at those numbers are wrong, what happens? And but, the reality, as I mentioned, is that management are most likely to use the analysis without bothering with the chart. If you're used to the numbers, you don't need the visual. The visual is handy to get used to seeing how they play out and so on, and useful if you want to talk to the boardroom. But other than that, you don't have to bother with it. Sorry, it won't move on. Okay, so break-even charts and break-even arithmetic should be used carefully. The major limitations of that break-even analysis are as follows. So firstly, a break-even chart can only apply one single product or a single mix with fixed proportions. So there's only room for one price, for example. So unless you're adding the prices together and assuming the sales are exactly the same, fortunately, or whatever, it's messy and it doesn't really work. It's assumed that fixed costs are the same if total and variable costs are the same per unit at all levels of output. So it's a real simplification. Fixed costs can change if output falls or increases dramatically. So most fixed costs can be step costs, and we can change the plan on a mobile phone company. We can get a new building if we need more space to make more product. So the rent is going to go up if we're making dramatically more products. We can sublet and cut off a wing of our building if sales are dramatically lower than expected and so on. So that's not taken into account. It's very crude, but it has its uses in that. So variable cost per unit will decrease where economy of scale are made at the higher output volumes, and the variable cost per unit can also increase where diseconomies of scale begin to appear at higher volumes. So there can be economy of scale and diseconomy of scale going to those big numbers. So an example of diseconomy of scale, suddenly if you're doing huge amounts of turnover, you now need a warehouse to store your product because there isn't room in the normal factory floor before it goes to the distributor. Maybe you need another warehouse for your raw material, and now you need forklifts and forklift drivers to handle that coming and going of product and raw materials and so on. And now you need warehouse staff. You need a new, all new setup perhaps that you didn't need before. So if you haven't come across the term economy of scale, it means reductions in the average cost of producing a product in the long run as the output increases. So when you can buy in bulk, you make savings, that kind of thing. So moving on then to cost-based approaches to pricing. So sometimes seen with a hyphen, sometimes not. So it could sometimes be like that. Cost-based. Does what it says on the tin. Let's see what we're talking about. So pricing decisions must take into account a range of factors, including demand and cost. Pricing decisions must have some regard to cost because the selling price of a product should exceed its average unit cost to make a profit. These are short-term expectations. So loss leaders, for example, where you're selling below cost, are designed to attract custom for other products. So in supermarkets, typically, to buy a raw whole chicken is quite cheap compared to, if you compare the price to even a tray of drumsticks or a tray of breasts or something. And it's usually a loss leader. It's sometimes a loss leader for the company producing the chicken, but also for the supermarket, because the average customer who is buying a raw whole chicken is usually purchasing for the family, and they're probably going to spend at least 100 quid in every visit to that shop. So if they come in for this, what's seen as a good deal, they'll be buying a whole load of other stuff that will, result in profit for the company. So that minuscule loss, or maybe zero, maybe if they're selling it at cost, that there's zero profit on the chicken, but profit on everything else, then it's a win all around by the time they get to the checkout. The drawback of cost-based pricing is a failure to take into account demand factors. So what will the customer think about this if it's X price or Y price? So sometimes we can talk about full cost plus pricing. And that just it just highlights that it's a more thorough cost calculation. So they're both cost-based, and sometimes just termed cost-based, sometimes listed as full cost plus or cost-based. So a traditional approach to pricing products is full cost plus pricing. It's a bit of a mouthful, whereby sales price is determined by calculating the full cost of the product and then adding the percentage markup for profit. The term target pricing is sometimes used, meaning setting a price so to achieve a certain target profit or return on capital. The full cost plus pricing, the full cost may be a fully absorbed production cost. So not just the, excuse me, not just the raw materials and the direct labor, but also a certain proportion to the lighting and the rent on the building and the receptionist and the warehousing staff and facilities or whatever. All those overheads that we call them. A business might have an idea of the percentage profit margin it would like to earn, and so might decide on an average profit markup as a general guide for pricing decisions. So the restaurant, trying to make sure that overall they come out with a profit at the end, they might just look at the food that goes into it and say, well, we'll charge 100% on that. Or they might look at the direct costs and know what the waitressing staff or whatever, or maybe just the chef's cost, and figure out what will cover all the other costs as well. So there's only one real issue, and the size of the profit markup. So the percentage profit margin is variable and presumably determined by management. And so that can be influenced by the wish to win the contract. So sometimes it might be a tender process where every time you have a customer, you have to give a quote for, maybe building a house or providing some services to a government department. So they might want to, if they really want the contract, they'll make sure they're the lowest bidder and so on, keep the margin tight. The likelihood of repeat orders is another thing to consider. We want to create a customer that will keep coming back to us. And whether the company has idle capacity or a full order book. So that is something, do you know what, we won't get into, but basically idle capacity is where the sales orders that we have so far, apart from this deal that we're about to make, we know that we're at 50% capacity. So we're selling at whatever that is, maybe that's 100,000 units per month. We have the ability to make 200,000 products a month. But because we're only at 50% capacity, perhaps all those orders are already paying the fixed costs, they're already paying the lighting and the heating and so on. And so if we were to fill our order book to capacity, so that the remaining 50%, we only need to make back the variable costs. The fixed costs have already been paid with what we're doing already, and maybe we just want to fill out and get whatever we can for the remaining 50%. So we can sell at a lower price in that scenario. There's no correct price, but companies should consider the price obviously shouldn't exceed the full cost. The company must make a judgment about demand conditions. If we charge a certain price, what are they going to think about our quality, and what are the what is the elasticity of our product? Like, just because we lower the price doesn't mean loads of people will buy it. So the problems with full cost plus pricing there are several serious problems with relying on a full cost approach to pricing, some of which have already been mentioned. So the need to adjust the prices to market and demand conditions. Budgeting output volume, which is a key factor of the fixed overhead absorption rate, and selecting a suitable basis for overhead absorption. How do we know if we have products A, B, and C being made in our factory? How do we know how to divide the reception and warehouse costing and so on between those three if we're not selling them at equal volumes? Most important criticism, it fails to recognize that since sales demand may be determined by sales price, there will be profit maximizing combination of price and demand. So the actual price, if we're just setting a price, adding a percentage, that can have an impact then on whether or not customers choose to buy our product. So it's not actually taking that into account. Further objections include, we know how difficult it is to budget accurately, and a sudden slump in demand will result in difficulties in achieving overall profit levels that were budgeted. When a firm produces more than one product, the accountants will have to allocate the fixed costs of production to different products, and this is usually subjective. So it could be depending on what day it's done, the answer could be different, or depending on who does it, they decide differently than the next person. So that's what subjective means. And because there is no real right answer, and it fails to allow for competition. It doesn't look at what the competition are charging. A full cost plus price is a means of ensuring that in the long run, the firm succeeds in covering all its fixed costs and making a profit out of revenue earned, but it's not flexible. It's inflexible. So we'll get to in a second what we can do. Advantages, on the other hand, since the size of the profit margin can be varied at the management's discretion, a price in excess of full cost should ensure that a firm working at normal capacity will cover all its fixed costs and make a profit. So companies may benefit from this if they carry out large contracts, which must make a sufficient profit margin to cover a fair share of fixed costs. If they must justify their prices to potential customers. So government departments sometimes will ask what the profit margin is, and they want to see the costs, how they're calculated, and what the profit is made up of, and so on. Or if they find it difficult to estimate the expected demand at different sales prices, then they just have to go with a number and hope for the best. So it's a simple, quick, cheap method of pricing. And it can be, as I said, used for like corner shops and restaurants where it's kind of, they don't have accountants at their disposal and, you know, they just want to come up with a handy price so they have their own way of doing it. And from trial and error, they know that that'll cover things for them, hopefully. So in a nutshell, full cost plus should ensure profitability, ignores demand conditions, ignores competition. Full cost assumes the overheads are properly accounted for, and it can work well alongside other approaches to pricing. So maybe we use this and something else to get that flexibility that it does not give us. So maybe we use this method to set the minimum price below which we will not sell. That's one possibility. So another approach is demand-based approaches. So a difficulty with demand-based approach to pricing is to find the balance between theory and practice. Price theory or demand theory, again, we're into economics, is based on the idea that a connection can be made between price, quantity demanded and sold, and total revenue. In practice, firms might not make estimates of demand at different price levels because they might not know how to, but they might still make pricing decisions on the basis of demand conditions and competition in the market. So they might roughly know, well, you know, if we lower or raise prices, we know that that'll stimulate demand, or maybe it won't do much. Some larger firms go to considerable lengths to estimate the demand for the products or services at different price levels by producing estimated demand curves. We don't need to get into it, just know that they exist. Price elasticity, so refer back to earlier in the recording if you can't remember, so price elasticity of demand is a measure of the responsiveness of demand to changes in price, the percentage, to changes in price, the percentage change in the quantity of a good demand divided by the percentage change in price. Sorry, it's a mouthful and I need a coffee. So competitors' prices, when competitors sell pretty much the same product in the same market, so maybe it's a shop all selling cans of Coke, or petrol station, roughly speaking, selling the same kind of petrol. There are different additives sometimes, but roughly speaking. And price differences are likely to have a significant effect on demand. So petrol is a classic example. Some people, they kind of have an idea, certain stations are more expensive than others, and they always have the prices outside and they'll check before they drive in because it could be a few euro in the difference of a full tank. When firms sell products which are not exactly identical, or where geographic location of sales point is significant, there is scope for charging different prices. So price differences can be achieved in a number of ways through product quality. So if you're offering a premium product, you can be expected to charge more. Design differences, same thing. Geographic location. So maybe we have two petrol stations, one is in Galway, one is in Dublin. We can independently decide the prices in each one and have totally different prices as a result of that, because they're not going to drive from one to the other. They're totally different, probably set of variables. Maybe the staff costs are different, or so there's some other differences in making up that price. And brand loyalty. Maybe we know we've got loyal customers in Dublin, or in one place, and less loyal somewhere else. We can charge more. Or maybe we have brand loyal customers, the competitors do not. We can charge more than they do. We have a stronger brand. Or maybe we have a weaker brand, and the other brand is the one that they can charge more and we can't. We will have to always charge less than them. So this is price discrimination when there's within the company, if you're selling essentially the same thing at two different prices. Where a firm can sell to two or more completely separate markets, it might be able to charge a different price in each market to maximize profits, because the demand function in each is different. Successful price discrimination depends on the ability of the firm to prevent the transfer of goods by a third party from the cheap market to a more expensive one. So if we're selling clothes and we had a clothes shop in Galway that was more expensive than the clothes shop in Dublin, well, would people just maybe buy from the cheaper one and get somebody to deliver over to Dublin? Is that possible? And then they might be making the difference in price instead of you, whoever is facilitating that sale. There are several ways in practice by which price discrimination can be exercised. Negotiation with individual customers on the basis of quantity. So if you buy in bulk, you get it cheaper per unit, by product type, by time, or by location. For price discrimination to be successful, certain market conditions must exist. So, you know what? I'm not going to go into price discrimination on the exam, so we'll skip it. Skip that. So other aspects that we look at: inflation, price leadership, average price, lowest price, product line pricing, discount pricing, new product pricing. We'll skip over some of this. We're in the final minutes, so just bear with me for just a little bit longer. So an organization should recognize the effects of inflation on pricing decisions. When costs are rising, it has to ensure that prices are increased sufficiently and regularly enough to make an adequate profit. Several guidelines for price reviews during an inflation period: fixed price long-term contracts should be avoided, so only agree a price for shorter periods of time. When one organization sets its price, it should decide how long it will be until the next price review. So have it already planned. We're going to review again in 3 months or 6 months. Prices should be reviewed regularly, so all these points are related. An organization can't assume that it can pass on the cost increases to customers by raising prices, because in a competitive market, competitors might opt to reduce their profit margins and place added emphasis on the control of costs, because the customers may not pay. If we raise our prices, they'll just buy from the cheaper competitors. And customers might resist, as I said, so price increases could result in fall in demand. When prices are reviewed, management must recognize that costs are likely to continue to rise, and so the new price levels ought to anticipate future cost increases up to the time of the next price review. So if we're saying we'll review in 3 months, we want to make sure that in 2.5 months' time, our costs are still being covered by that price. So if we're only doing it every 6 months, then up to 5.5 months' time, that price should still be, roughly speaking, okay, and certainly covering costs, even if the profit has been eroded. Now, Price leadership we alluded to earlier in the topic. In some markets, there's a price leader. Apple, we keep talking about as a price leader. That price leader, Apple, indicates to other firms what the price will be. So they set their own price. They don't care what the others set their price, or maybe they just make sure that they're always above it. But what happens is the price leader sets their price, and the followers or competitors will then set their price and always make sure to be below it. So they don't necessarily, the leader doesn't necessarily need to check what the competition are doing, but they will anyway. The nature of price leadership, where it exists, is likely to vary from industry to industry and will depend on the number of firms within the industry. And things can change. The leader 10 years ago could be different to the leader now or last year. So then average. So if you have a leader, you have to have a follower and so on. And then you have other companies that will just take an average and their average price strategy or a lowest price strategy. So does what it says on the tin. The average price strategy and lowest price strategy are two forms of strategy based on what competitors charge. The average pricing might be adopted if products sold by all firms in the market. So we're a shop selling Coke. We just see what is everybody else charging and let's go down the middle. We're not making any outlandish promises. We're not saying we're wonderful. We're offering anything better than anyone else. We don't want to put people off by being too high, and we don't want too low a profit margin. So we stick in the safe zone in the middle. Company, it could also be that the company doesn't wish to be an aggressor in the market for fear of provoking a price war or increased competition. If you set the lowest price strategy, not only are you already setting yourself up for a low profit margin, you're also inviting your competitors to answer that challenge and lower their prices. So if you're going for the lowest price strategy, are you confident that the competitors will not follow you? Are you confident that you can make a profit at that level? And are you also confident that maybe if you didn't, would you still make the sales if it was an average price? So are you getting more sales, and are you getting enough more sales to warrant that lower profit margin? So you need to be really careful with a lowest price strategy. So the attitude of customers influences these decisions. The lowest price strategy might be associated with market aggression or low quality. When a major company in a competitive market pursues a lowest price strategy, it might trigger a price war. Price is often a guide to quality. And so customers then may say, well, is this maybe isn't a regular Coke? Is this a fake can of Coke, or is it coming from some unregulated country where production practices mightn't be as good? You start raising these questions with customers potentially. So new product pricing, we've talked a lot about already, so nothing new here. Pricing of new products requires that principles discussed previously are considered very carefully. Two time factors to consider. Short term is getting the product into the market. And then the long term is to ensure that it's a worthwhile venture for the company. So price skimming is, remember, that's taking the cream. So it's maximizing profit, involves setting an initial high price and then gradually reducing it later on, exactly what the mobile phone companies do. And then penetration pricing is the opposite. So setting a low price, hoping that later on, when you build a reputation and so on, that you can start charging a bit more for your products. The problem with the low price strategy is if your customers get used to paying low price, will they accept the higher prices later on, or will they just leave you and go somewhere else for cheaper prices? So effective market research is what's required there to make good tactical decisions. Now, final couple of slides, price fixing and predatory pricing. The emotional and subjective nature of price creates many situations in which misunderstandings between the seller and buyer cause ethical problems. Monopolistic market structures, price competition may be avoided by tacit agreement with leading to concentration on non-price competition. So do you ever notice that petrol stations in a particular town or area, they all seem to be within 1 cent of each other? They may not be talking to each other, but they are, pretty much operating in a monopolistic way. So they're all following the same price. There's no competition there. Whether agreements exist is hard to prove, as competitors are exposed to the same market forces, so would expect to set similar prices. This is a problem for government agencies such as the Office of Fair Trading, when attempting to establish if unethical price agreements such as price fixing exist. So if they all agree in a certain area to charge certain price, that's called price fixing, and it's within Ireland and the UK and America and so on, that kind of thing is illegal. Predatory pricing is another issue, when a company seeks to earn high profits at the expense of customers. So, for example, if it's a 24-hour shop and at night time charging more because people who are coming in to buy nappies in the middle of the night are desperate and they will not walk out of there without the nappies no matter what the price is. So that would be predatory pricing in that case. Okay, so there's some examples of exam questions, 2 slides here. And as I said, this topic is definitely coming up. So practice some of these questions and go back over the notes. So you can pause there, have a read through of those, have a read through of these, take out your notebook and start practicing. Sorry it went on. This was a long one, but it is an important one and it is coming up. So give it your attention. Thanks.